Marcus tilted the crystal glass. The red wine splashed onto Elena's leather shoes. It soaked the cheap fabric and pooled on the white marble. The stain was dark and ugly. Marcus didn't pull away. "You are a smudge on this floor, Elena," he hissed. His voice was sharp. "This stone costs $10,000. Your shoes are garbage. Don't move. Don't drip on the history of this room." Elena stood still. She didn't blink. She felt the cold liquid seep into her socks. Across the hall, Tiffany shimmered. The Eternal Tears necklace hung from her neck. 12 carats of stolen diamonds caught the flash of every camera. Tiffany touched the center stone and laughed. She didn't know the girl in the stained shoes had spent 500 hours sketching that curve in a damp basement. She didn't know the ink on the original blueprints was Elena's sweat and blood. The socialites whispered. They pointed at Elena's feet. They pointed at Tiffany's neck. "Look at the stray." A woman in a silk gown muttered, "She doesn't belong in the Savoy." Marcus heard them and felt the surge of power. He reached out and flicked a drop of wine at Elena's collar. "Leave," he commanded. "This gala is for creators, not for cleaning staff who pretend to be interns. You are a zero, Elena. A rounding error in Tiffany's success. You have nothing but the dirt on your heels." The grand doors slammed open. Julian Vane entered. The room went dead. The music seemed to stop without a command. Julian didn't look at the photographers. He didn't look at the billionaires bowing in his path. He walked through the crowd. He stopped, 2 inches from Elena. His presence was a physical weight that crushed the air. He didn't ask for a towel. He didn't call a servant. Julian Vane knelt. His $4,000 suit hit the wine-stained floor. He reached out and grasped Elena's ankle. His hand was iron. It was a cold, possessive grip that anchored her to the spot. He tied her lace with a snap. The sound echoed in the silence. The room stopped breathing. Marcus stumbled back. His face turned the color of spoiled milk. "Mr. Vane," he stammered. His hands were shaking. "She is just an intern. She made a mess on the marble. I was just correcting her." Julian didn't look up. He tightened the knot. "The mess isn't on her feet," Julian said. His voice was a low vibration that traveled through the floorboards. "The mess is the trash standing in front of her." He stood up. He loomed over Marcus. Julian's hand moved to the small of Elena's back. He pulled her flush against him. It was an aggressive claim of territory. He smelled of rain and cold steel. The heat of his body was a shield. Tiffany stepped forward. Her smile was a mask of desperation. "Julian, darling, you must be mistaken. This girl is nothing. She is a shadow in my department. I kept her here out of pity." Julian's gaze shifted to Tiffany. It was a killing frost. "I did not give you permission to speak my name, Miss Miller, and I did not give you permission to wear my property." He reached out and tapped the necklace. The diamonds looked dead under his touch. "This piece is a fraud," Julian said. "The design was stolen. The soul is missing." Elena looked at the clock above the ballroom doors. The gold hands hit 11:50. 10 minutes left. The 3-year probation was screaming toward zero. Tiffany had built a palace on stolen ink. Elena was about to light the match. Julian leaned into Elena's ear. His breath was the only warmth in the freezing room. His hand slid from her waist to the nape of her neck. His thumb pressed against her pulse. "Break them now?" he whispered. "Now," Elena said. Her voice was a calm blade. Julian turned to the technicians at the sound booth. He didn't gesture. He simply looked at them. The music died. The giant digital screens behind the stage flickered. Marcus tried to step away, but Julian's security team blocked the exits. They were tall men in black suits who moved with silent precision. Marcus looked at Julian's hand on Elena's neck and realized the hierarchy had flipped. The intern was the center of the universe. Tiffany gripped the microphone on the stage. Her knuckles were white. "You can't prove anything," she yelled. "I am the face of Miller Global. I am the legacy." Julian pulled Elena closer. His grip was heavy and certain. "You are a squatter," Julian said. and the eviction notice just arrived. Elena pulled a black terminal from her pocket. It was a device that looked like a shard of obsidian. One red light blinked in the center. She looked at Tiffany, who was sweating under the stage lights. 3 years, Tiffany, Elena said. You had 3 years to be honest. You chose to be a parasite. Elena swiped her thumb across the glass. The scorched earth protocol is now active. A digital voice echoed through the ballroom. It was the voice of the late jewelry queen. It was Elena's mother. The lights in the Savoy flickered and turned a harsh, clinical blue. The digital displays glitched. The name Miller Global vanished. The gold letters dissolved into gray dust. Access revoked. The voice continued. Patent 2204. Cancelled. Trademark status nullified. Credit facility for the Miller estate frozen. Tiffany's heart hammered against her ribs. She grabbed the Eternal Tears necklace, but the clasp suddenly snapped. The diamonds hit the marble floor. They sounded like stones in the silence. Julian's hand tightened on Elena's neck. He looked at Tiffany with pure contempt. You didn't just take her designs, Julian said. You used her mother's trust to fund your life. But that trust had a kill switch, and she just pressed it. Chimes rang on every guest's phone simultaneously. It was a public filing from the High Court. The news moved through the room like a virus. Her assets are being seized. A woman gasped in the front row. The bank just canceled her cards. Marcus looked at his phone. His face went white. My accounts, he whispered. They are 0. Everything I took, it's gone. Julian looked at the security team. Clear the stage, he commanded. The guards moved in. They didn't touch Elena. They went for Tiffany. They grabbed her by the arms and dragged her away from the microphone. She was screaming, her heels scuffing the floor. The stage is yours, Elena, Julian murmured. Show them who the real architect is. While I watched them fall, Elena walked to the center stage. 2 technicians wheeled out a massive digital tablet. Every guest leaned forward. Tiffany scrambled to block the path. Her eyes were red. You are a nobody, she screamed. Her voice cracked. This is my stage. Security. The guards didn't move. They stood like stone statues. Julian moved behind Elena. He caught Tiffany's wrist midair. He didn't just hold her. He twisted her arm behind her back. The sound of her shoulder joint clicking caught the microphone. A sharp, dry snap. Tiffany let out a strangled cry. Don't interrupt the artist, Julian whispered. His voice was a low thunder. He leaned into Elena's space. His hand was a heavy weight on the small of her back. His palm was hot through her silk dress. It was a brand. Elena picked up the digital pen. She didn't look at the crowd. She drew 3 swift strokes on the blank screen. The outline of a necklace appeared. The frozen heart. This design was patented by Tiffany 2 years ago. Elena zoomed in on the center stone. She drew 2 more lines that seemed random. When they connected, they formed a hidden monogram. A signature woven into the geometry of the gems. It wasn't Tiffany's initials. It was the mark of the Jewel Queen. Elena's mother. The crowd erupted. Fraud! Someone shouted from the front row. The cameras flashed 1,000 times a second. Marcus tried to run. He scrambled for the back exit. He gripped a black briefcase filled with stolen bearer bonds. He didn't get far. Julian's investigator, Silas, stepped on Marcus's hand. The sound of fingers snapping under a leather boot was rhythmic. 1, 2, 3. Marcus hit the floor. He was screaming. I'll tell you everything, he choked out. Tiffany made me steal the Blue Empress. She promised me 10%. Tiffany looked at Marcus. You coward, she yelled. Her hair was a matted mess of sweat and extensions. I paid for your gambling debts. Julian let go of Tiffany's arm. He shoved her toward the police officers entering the hall. He didn't look at her as a woman. He looked at her as waste. You gave him stolen money, Julian said. His voice was flat. Now, you will give the state 20 years of your life. Tiffany began to laugh. She grabbed a bottle of champagne. and smashed it against a marble pillar. The glass rained down on the guests. "You're all fake," she screamed at the socialites. "You loved me yesterday." "They weren't your designs, Tiffany," Elena said. Her voice was a calm blade. "You were just the mannequin I used to test the market." Tiffany lunged again. She tripped over her own ripped hem. She hit the floor hard. Her face splashed into the wine Marcus had poured on Elena's shoes earlier. The queen was face down in the dirt she had created. Julian didn't wait for her to get up. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat. He pulled out a velvet box. He placed it on the podium. "The Blue Empress was in Marcus's briefcase," Julian announced. "Grand larceny. Corporate sabotage. There is no bail." Two officers grabbed Tiffany by the armpits. They dragged her toward the exit. Her heels left long black scuffs on the white marble. She wasn't a socialite anymore. She was a convict. Julian turned Elena around. He lifted her by the waist and sat her on the edge of the podium. He stood between her legs, eye level and aggressive. "Let her scream," Julian whispered. His lips brushed hers. "By tomorrow, no one will remember her name, but the world will never forget yours." He didn't wait for her to answer. He kissed her. It was a claim, a seal of the new empire. The police van doors slammed shut with a heavy metallic boom. It was the sound of a coffin closing on Tiffany's life. Through the reinforced glass, she saw the Savoy Ballroom's lights still glowing. She saw the photographers turning their lenses away from her. They were already deleting her files to make room for Elena's face on the front page. Inside the hall, the atmosphere was a graveyard. 100 guests stood in a circle of silence. Julian didn't let go of Elena. He kept her pinned against the mahogany podium. His hand moved from her waist to her throat. His thumb rested over her pulse. He felt her heart racing. It was the heat of the fire they had just started. "Silence," Julian commanded. He didn't use a microphone. His voice reached every corner of the room. He looked at the front row of socialites. "Lady Catherine," he said. He pointed a cold finger at a woman in a $50,000 Chanel suit. "You were the one who laughed when Marcus poured wine on Elena's shoes." The woman's face turned gray. "Julian, please," she stammered. "I was just caught in the moment. I didn't know." Julian cut her off. He didn't raise his voice. "Your line of credit at Vane Bank is canceled as of this second. Your invitation to the Paris Fashion Week Gala is revoked. You are a ghost in this industry. Do not try to call my office. You are finished." Lady Catherine gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. She looked around for support. The people next to her took a sharp step back. They didn't want to be touched by her failure. Social death was a contagious disease in this room. Julian's gaze moved through the crowd. It was a scythe. "Lord Harrington," he said, "you signed the contract to distribute Tiffany's stolen designs in Asia. You have 12 hours to recall every piece. If one earring with a Miller logo stays on a shelf, I will liquidate your holding company by Monday morning. I will strip you of your title and your assets." Harrington dropped his glass of champagne. It shattered on the marble. "I'll do it," he choked out. "I'll burn the inventory myself." "Please, Julian. We have been friends for 20 years. "We were never friends," Julian said. "You were just a client who forgot who owned the bank." This was the social erasure. Julian wasn't just punishing the criminals. He was salt-earthing the entire field. He turned back to Elena. His eyes were dark and hungry. He leaned down and bit the shell of her ear. It was a sharp sting, the wound and the cure. Elena shivered. Her fingers dug into the heavy fabric of his suit. Across the room, the digital technicians finished the purge. The Miller Global logo on the main screen flickered and died. A new symbol appeared. A crown of thorns woven with emeralds. The House of the Ghost Queen. A tall man in a gray suit approached the podium. He was the estate executor. "Miss Elena," he said. He bowed low. "The Scorched Earth Protocol has successfully clawed back 95% of the diverted assets. The $5 million Marcus lost at the underground casino? We have seized his family's estate in Tuscany to cover the difference. Your mother's jewelry collection is currently being transported to your private vault in Zurich. Lena looked at the ring on her finger. The raw emerald was heavy. It felt like power. Where is Marcus? She asked. Her voice was steady. He is with the private debt collectors. Julian answered for the executor. His voice was a low growl. He didn't go to a standard jail. He went to a place where they don't care about human rights. He will spend the next 10 years working off every cent he stole from your mother. He will never see the sun again. Julian's hand tightened on Elena's neck. It was a claim, a reminder that while she was the queen, he was the one who held the throne. You're tired, he murmured. The car is waiting. Let's leave this trash behind. Wait, Elena said. She looked at the crowd. The people who had called her a stray cat, the people who had mocked her shoes. She picked up the microphone. Her voice was a scalpel. Look at your watches, she said. 100 people looked at their wrists. In 5 minutes, your names will be uploaded to the LVM blacklist, Elena said. You will never buy another luxury good. You will never enter another high-end hotel unless you apologize to the shoes you laughed at. The room went into a frenzy. Elegant women in gowns threw themselves onto their knees. Men in tuxedos scrambled to the spot where the wine had been spilled. They were scrubbing the marble with their silk napkins. They were begging for a second chance. Forgive us, Elena, Lady Catherine wailed. She was on her knees, her Chanel suit soaking up the spilled wine. We didn't know. It was a pathetic, beautiful sight. The elite of London were groveling at the feet of the girl they had called a zero. Julian laughed. It was a dark, dry sound. You're more ruthless than your mother, he whispered against her lips. I think I'm going to enjoy keeping you. He didn't wait for her to agree. He swept her up in his arms. His grip was aggressive and certain. He walked out of the ballroom. He stepped over the kneeling socialites as if they were nothing more than paving stones. The rain outside was a wall of cold water. Julian's men held umbrellas, creating a black tunnel of silk and steel. As they reached the Rolls-Royce, Elena saw the police van driving away. Tiffany was leaning her head against the bars. Her eyes were empty, the identity void. Elena didn't look back. She let Julian slide her into the leather darkness of the car. The door shut with a heavy thud. The world of the socialites was gone. Only the fire remained. The Rolls-Royce cut through the London night. Inside the cabin, the air was heavy. Julian sat beside Elena. His thigh pressed against hers. His hand clamped the back of her neck. It was a cold, possessive grip. He didn't sit across from her. He claimed her space. 1,095 days. Julian whispered. That is how long I watched you scrub floors. I watched you take insults from people who aren't fit to breathe. Elena leaned her head back against his hand. The weight of the raw emerald was an anchor. I had to know, she said. I had to see if Tiffany had a shred of loyalty. Julian's thumb traced her jaw. He didn't use soft words. He used the truth. She didn't. And now she is being incinerated. The car pulled up to a gray building near the docks. This wasn't a police station. This was a private holding facility owned by the Vane Group. The rain was a roar on the roof. Julian opened the door. He didn't let her walk on the wet pavement. He lifted her. His arms were iron. He carried her inside. The interior was bright and sterile. In a glass room, Tiffany sat on a metal chair. She wore the ripped $60,000 dress. She was a pile of trash. When she saw Elena, she lunged at the glass. Her fingernails scratched the surface. Let me out, Tiffany screamed. The speakers carried her voice. Elena, tell them it was a mistake. I'll give you the money back. 5 million, 10 million, take it all. Elena walked to the glass. She didn't look angry. She looked bored. The sister who had dictated Elena's breath was now begging for attention. You don't have $10 million, Tiffany, Elena said. Her voice was amplified. It was a judgment. You don't even have the clothes on your back. Those were bought with my mother's trust. The police will take them in 5 minutes. Julian stood behind Elena. His hands rested on her shoulders. He looked at Tiffany with sharp eyes. You are being processed as Jane Doe, he said. Tiffany froze. What? My name is Tiffany Miller. No, Julian said. Miller Global is gone. The Miller family name is retired. You were never legally adopted. Your biological father is a felon. You have no claim to the name. You have no passport. You have no birth certificate in the system. We wiped the servers. This was the Path C identity void. Tiffany began to hyperventilate. She looked at her hands. You can't do that. People know me. I have 2 million followers on Instagram. Julian pulled out his phone. He turned the screen to the glass. Your account was deleted 10 minutes ago, he said. Every tagged photo of you is gone. Every news article is archived under a password you will never have. To the world, Tiffany Miller never existed. Tiffany hit the glass with her forehead. She was sobbing, a wet, pathetic sound. I'm real. I'm here. You are a ghost, Elena said. She turned away. And I don't talk to ghosts. They walked back to the exit. They passed a door where Marcus was held. He wasn't screaming. He was curled in a ball. 2 men in suits stood over him. They held a stack of legal documents. It was a death warrant. Marcus was with the debt collectors now. His fate was a black hole of interest rates and labor. Julian didn't look at the door. He led Elena to the car. The rain washed the last of the ballroom's dust off her shoes. As the car pulled away, Elena saw 2 men carrying a black plastic bag to the curb. It held Tiffany's ripped dress. The disposal was finished. The car drove toward the Miller estate. Julian pulled a bottle of vintage scotch from the bar. He poured 2 glasses. 25 years old, he said. Just like you. Elena took a sip. The liquid was fire. She looked at Julian. He was watching her. What now? She asked. Julian leaned in. His lips brushed her neck. His hand moved to her waist. He pulled her onto his lap in one motion. It was aggressive. Now, he whispered, we rebuild. I spent 3 years waiting for you. I am an impatient man. He didn't wait. He kissed her. It was a deep claim. The car moved through the dark streets. It carried the new queen and the man who had burned the world for her. The past was a smudge of wine on marble. The future was a crown of emeralds, and a name that no one would dare to mock again.
Seeing Tiffany Miller get deleted from the human record wasn't just a downfall. It was a total social autopsy performed in real time. There is something terrifyingly beautiful about watching a fake life dissolve into a black plastic bag on a curb while the real architect takes the throne. But let's be real, is wiping someone's entire legal existence a fair trade for stolen jewelry? Or did Elena cross a line into true villain territory herself? Between us, I almost gave Marcus a redemption arc, but then I remembered that wine-stained shoe and decided he deserved every second in that private debt facility.